Blood pooled on the linoleum floor of the break room, a stark, sickening contrast to the sterile white tiles. That was my final memory, before the freezing darkness took me, dying because I stepped in front of a weapon to protect my pregnant coworker, who then literally stepped over my bleeding body to save herself. Now my eyes are wide open, my pulse is racing, and things are going to be very different. Fluorescent lights hummed above my head, casting that familiar, soul-sucking glow over the accounting department of Meridian Logistics. My lungs hitched as I drew in a ragged breath, gripping the edge of my faux wood laminate desk. There were no bullet wounds, no screaming, no blood. Just the monotonous clatter of keyboards and the smell of cheap coffee. I checked the digital clock on my monitor. October 14th, 2024. I had jumped back exactly 8 months. 8 months before Ramona's deranged, debt-ridden ex-boyfriend stormed into the office. 8 months before I threw myself in front of him to shield her swollen belly. 8 months before she shoved me directly into his path so she could slip out the emergency exit. Earth to Camila? Hello? A manicured hand snapped its fingers in front of my face. I blinked, bringing the present into focus. Standing over my cubicle was Ramona Higgins. She was 26, notoriously entitled, and holding a pink pastry box. Her eyes, framed by heavy eyelash extensions, stared down at me with an expectation I knew all too well from my past life. Conference room, 5 minutes, Ramona chirped, placing a hand protectively over her perfectly flat stomach. I'm making my big announcement, and we are discussing the new meal roster. The meal roster. My stomach churned with a mixture of nausea and boiling rage. In my previous life, this was the exact moment my descent into financial and emotional ruin began. Ramona was announcing her pregnancy to the department. Because the father had bolted and she was struggling, the office, spearheaded by our HR manager and resident self-proclaimed savior, Beulah Walsh, decided that we all needed to pitch in to feed the mother-to-be. Not just any food, mind you. Ramona claimed she had a highly sensitive palate and required organic, locally sourced, artisanal meals. In that life, I was young, foolishly empathetic, and desperate for workplace harmony. I spent thousands of dollars from my savings, catering to her ridiculous demands, cooking wild-caught salmon, and buying $12 pints of organic raspberries, only to be repaid with betrayal and death. I'll be there, I said, my voice deadpan. When I walked into the conference room, the scene was exactly as I remembered. Beulah Walsh was already holding court. Beulah was a woman in her late 40s who wore too much floral print and draped herself in toxic positivity. She thrived on inserting herself into other people's crises so she could play the saint, collecting moral superiority points, while usually forcing others to do the actual heavy lifting. "Gather round, everyone," Beulah beamed, clapping her hands together. "Our sweet Ramona, some beautiful news to share." Ramona stood at the head of the table, dabbing a fake tear from her eye. "Thank you, Beulah. I'm expecting. But as you know, I'm doing this alone. My doctor says I am at high risk for nutritional deficiencies, and honestly, on my salary, I just can't afford the organic diet my baby needs to survive." Cue the sympathetic murmurs from the naive staff. Beulah stepped forward, placing a comforting arm around Ramona's shoulders. "It takes a village, people. Meridian Logistics is a family. So I've taken the liberty of drawing up a feeding schedule. Each of us will take turns providing Ramona with her daily breakfast and lunch. I have a list of her dietary requirements right here. Beulah passed a clipboard down the table. When it reached me, I didn't even look at it. I remembered the list perfectly. No GMOs, no farmed fish, no non-organic poultry, only alkaline water and specific imported Greek yogurts. Camilla, Beulah smiled, a sickly sweet expression that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. Since you don't have any kids or a husband to worry about, I went ahead and put you down for Mondays and Wednesdays. It's the least you can do, given your flexible schedule. The room went silent, waiting for my usual meek compliance. I pushed the clipboard back across the table. It slid with a loud scrape, stopping right in front of Beulah. No, I said, my voice loud and clear in the quiet room. Beulah's smile froze. Excuse me? I said no. I will not be participating in the feeding roster. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. I am an accountant, Beulah, not a private chef or a charity service. My salary is mine. If Ramona cannot afford to feed herself, I suggest HR help her look into government assistance programs rather than extorting her co-workers. Gasps rippled through the room. Ramona's jaw dropped, her face turning a mottled shade of red. Camilla! Beulah gasped, clutching her imaginary pearls. How can you be so heartless? There is an innocent child involved. Where is your empathy? My empathy is reserved for people who don't demand I fund their lifestyle choices, I replied coldly, standing up. If you feel so passionately about being a village, Beulah, you are more than welcome to take my shifts. In fact, why don't you take all of them? You are the HR manager. You make significantly more than any of us. I'm sure feeding Ramona will be a breeze for a saint like you. Before either of them could sputter out a response, I turned on my heel and walked out of the conference room. My heart pounded against my ribs, but for the first time since waking up, I felt a massive weight lift from my shoulders. The trap was set. By the end of the week, the office dynamics had violently shifted. Beulah, desperate to save face after my public challenge, had proudly declared that she would personally handle all of Ramona's meals. She paraded through the office every morning with bags from Whole Foods and high-end bistros, making sure everyone saw how generous and maternal she was. She even posted photos of the meals on her social media with hashtags like #workplacefamily and #takesvillage. But I knew the reality of feeding Ramona Higgins. I knew it better than anyone. It took exactly 14 days for Beulah's saintly facade to begin cracking. I was at the copy machine when I overheard the first sign of trouble. Beulah was whispering furiously into her cell phone in the adjacent hallway. I don't care if the avocados were slightly bruised. You can't just throw away a $20 salad. Yes, I know the baby needs healthy fats, but Ramona, I can't keep leaving work to buy you fresh macadamia nuts. I smiled to myself, hitting the collate button. Ramona's demands were not just expensive. They were psychologically exhausting. If a meal was too cold, she cried. If the brand of sparkling water was wrong, she claimed it gave her acid reflux and demanded a replacement. In my past life, I had drained nearly $6,000 in just a few months trying to appease her. Beulah, who was secretly up to her eyeballs in credit card debt to maintain her suburban lifestyle, was bleeding out financially. Later that afternoon, Beulah cornered me in the break room. She looked haggard. The bags under her eyes were dark, and her normally impeccable hair was slightly frizzed. Camilla, she started, attempting to plaster on her old condescending smile. I know we got off on the wrong foot regarding the baby roster. I was thinking, maybe you've had time to reflect. Perhaps you'd like to chip in for Friday lunches, just to show you're a team player. I poured my coffee, taking my time. Oh, Beulah, I couldn't possibly rob you of your blessing. You've been doing such an amazing job. Just yesterday, Ramona was telling the marketing team how you're practically a second mother to her. Why ruin that bond? Beulah's eye twitched. Yes, well, a mother's work is never done. But even mothers need help. Stay strong, Beulah, I whispered mockingly, patting her shoulder as I walked past. The village believes in you. The breaking point arrived the following month, during the company's annual open house networking event. It was a miserable Friday evening mixer, where executives brought clients, and the rest of us were expected to mingle. Beulah was actively avoiding Ramona, who was currently terrorizing a caterer over the origin of the shrimp hors d'oeuvres. I was sipping club soda near the back when the doors opened and Richard Higgins walked in. Richard was Ramona's estranged father. I only knew this because, in my past life, he showed up briefly at the hospital after I died, more concerned about the public relations nightmare for his construction firm than his daughter's trauma. Richard was in his late 50s, possessed a ruthless, stingy personality, and was undeniably wealthy. He wore a tailored Brioni suit and a Rolex that cost more than my annual salary. He had cut Ramona off 2 years ago because she refused to work for his company and kept crashing his luxury cars. Beulah, scanning the room for any excuse to escape her self-imposed financial ruin, locked eyes on Richard. I watched her gaze drop to his expensive watch, then to his polished Italian leather shoes. A predatory gleam sparked in the HR manager's eyes. I casually strolled over to Beulah, standing just close enough to whisper conspiratorially. "Do you know who that is?" I asked, nodding toward Richard. Beulah feigned indifference. "A new client?" "That's Richard Higgins, Ramona's father. He owns Higgins Commercial Construction. He's incredibly wealthy, recently divorced, and completely alone in that massive mansion of his in Westridge." I conveniently left out the part where he absolutely despised his daughter's behavior and hadn't given her a dime in 24 months. Beulah's posture straightened. Her mind was practically churning out a spreadsheet of possibilities. She was desperate for cash to fund her lifestyle, and she was currently acting as the maternal savior to his pregnant daughter. In Beulah's narcissistic mind, this was a cinematic setup. She would approach him, show him how wonderfully she was caring for his beloved daughter, and he would sweep her off her feet in a wave of gratitude and immense wealth. "Is that so?" Beulah murmured, her hands smoothing down her skirt. "It's a shame he's missing out on this beautiful journey. Someone really ought to bridge the gap between them. For the baby's sake, of course." "Of course," I agreed, masking my smirk behind my glass. "You know, Beulah, since you've been like a surrogate mother to Ramona, you're probably the only person he would listen to. You could be the one to reunite them." Beulah puffed up, her saint complex fully activated by the scent of money. "You're right, Camilla. It takes a delicate, nurturing touch to heal family trauma." She grabbed 2 glasses of expensive champagne from a passing tray and began her march across the ballroom toward Richard Higgins. I watched her go, leaning back against a marble pillar. In my past life, I was the naive shield who died for a woman who didn't care about me, surrounded by people who used me. But now, I was the architect. Beulah was about to introduce herself to a notoriously tight-fisted, cynical millionaire, using his worst nightmare, his daughter's financial dependency, as her opening pickup line. She thought she was securing a sugar daddy. She had no idea she was about to audition for the role of the most miserable stepmom in the world. And I was going to enjoy every single second of the show. The grand ballroom of the Marriott was buzzing with corporate chatter and the clinking of crystal. But my eyes were fixated on the impending collision of two colossal egos. From my vantage point behind a towering ice sculpture, I watched Beulah Walsh glide toward Richard Higgins with the practiced grace of a seasoned predator. She handed him the glass of champagne, flashing a smile that was equal parts maternal warmth and calculated seduction. Richard, a man who viewed every interaction as a potential transaction, eyed Beulah with immediate suspicion. However, as I stealthily drifted closer to eavesdrop, I heard Beulah deploy her masterstroke. "Mr. Higgins, I'm Beulah. I'm the HR manager over at Meridian Logistics. I just had to come over and introduce myself. Your daughter, Ramona, is an absolute light in our office, and I've taken it upon myself to ensure she and your future grandchild are getting the absolute best nutrition and care possible during this trying time." Richard's posture stiffened. For a split second, a look of sheer panic crossed his weathered face. He knew his daughter. He knew the bottomless pit of her financial demands. You are paying for Ramona's lifestyle?" he asked, his voice low, gravelly, and laced with disbelief. Beulah beamed, mistaking his shock for admiration. "Oh, it's my pleasure. I bring her organic, farm-to-table meals every single day. A mother's intuition just took over, you know. It takes a village, and I am more than happy to be her village." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop from laughing out loud. Richard Higgins didn't see a compassionate savior standing before him. He saw a spectacular, gullible human shield. For 2 years, he had been dodging his daughter's relentless demands for cash, cars, and luxury apartments. Now here was a woman actively volunteering to shoulder the financial burden of the most high-maintenance pregnant woman in the tri-state area. "Is that so?" Richard's tone shifted, suddenly oozing a smooth, practiced charm. He leaned in, casually flashing his Rolex Submariner. "Beulah, I must say, it is rare to meet a woman with such profound generosity. I've been so worried about Ramona. It weighs heavy on a father's heart." The hook was set. Beulah's eyes widened at the proximity to his wealth. Over the next 3 months, their courtship was the talk of the office. Beulah practically floated through the cubicles, loudly discussing her weekend getaways to Richard's estate in Westridge and the exclusive country club dinners. She treated the rest of us like peasants, her saintly facade replaced by an unbearable, aristocratic arrogance. Yet I noticed the subtle cracks. Beulah was still bringing Ramona her extravagant daily meals. Salmon bowls from Erohon, $50 imported vitamin supplements, and cold-pressed juices that cost more than my hourly wage. When I casually asked Beulah why Richard wasn't picking up the tab for his own grandchild's food, she quickly got defensive, stammering that Richard wanted to preserve their special bond, and that he was testing her loyalty to the family. By January, Richard proposed. It wasn't with a romantic gesture in Paris. It was a practical, tax-motivated courthouse ceremony. Beulah, blinded by the sprawling Westridge mansion and the promise of elite status, eagerly signed the ironclad prenuptial agreement. He slid across the table. She thought she had won the lottery. She had no idea she had just signed a contract for indentured servitude. The reality of marrying Richard Higgins crashed down on Beulah just 48 hours after the wedding. I found out the delicious details because Beulah, completely unraveled, broke down in the ladies' room during a Tuesday lunch hour. I was washing my hands when she burst from the stall, her face streaked with expensive waterproof mascara. "He locks the thermostat, Camilla," she sobbed, gripping the edge of the porcelain sink. "The man is worth $80 million, and he puts a literal padlock on the thermostat. He keeps the house at 60 degrees. I handed her paper towel, forcing a sympathetic expression. "Oh, Beulah, that's just frugal. A lot of wealthy people are eccentric." "Frugal?" she practically shrieked. "He made me pay for my half of the marriage license. And worse, now that we're married, he officially cut off the tiny remaining trust fund allowance he was giving Ramona. He told her that since I am her new stepmother, and I am so passionate about her well-being, I am now legally and morally responsible for all her maternal expenses." I stared at her, letting the absolute poetry of the situation wash over me. Wow. That is a lot of responsibility. But you always said it takes a village, right? Beulah's face crumpled. "She wants a $3,000 snoo-smart bassinet, Camilla. And Richard told me I need to pull it from my salary, because his money is tied up in illiquid assets, and I need to learn fiscal discipline. Han even audits my grocery receipts to make sure I'm not buying name-brand paper towels for the house." The self-proclaimed office saint was trapped. She couldn't divorce him. The prenup dictated she would leave with absolutely nothing if the marriage lasted less than 5 years. She couldn't stop feeding Ramona, because Ramona would immediately run to Richard, and Richard would relentlessly verbally abuse Beulah for failing her stepmotherly duties. Beulah had traded her middle-class comfort for a frozen mansion, a penny-pinching tyrant of a husband, and a monstrously entitled stepdaughter who viewed her as a walking ATM. I went back to my desk and enjoyed the best cup of cheap office coffee I had ever tasted in my 2 lifetimes. Spring bled into early summer. It was June 14th, 2025. The air conditioning in the Meridian Logistics building was broken again, leaving the accounting department sticky, irritable, and tense. My pulse thrummed a chaotic rhythm against my throat. This was the day. In my first life, this was the exact date that Trent Lawson, Ramona's unstable, heavily indebted ex-boyfriend, and the father of her child, kicked down the glass doors of our suite. He had found out she was planning to put his name on the birth certificate to garnish his non-existent wages for child support. In that timeline, I was in the break room, handing Ramona her organic smoothie when Trent stormed in. I took the blow from a heavy steel wrench meant for her head. She used my collapsing body as a hurdle to reach the exit. Today, I was prepared. I had requested a desk audit that morning, intentionally moving my workspace to a secluded corner office on the opposite side of the floor, right next to the fire stairs. I had a clear line of sight down the main hallway, but I was completely out of the strike zone. At 11:45 a.m., Beulah Walsh practically dragged herself into the office. She looked 10 years older than she had the previous October. She was carrying a massive insulated delivery bag from an upscale vegan bistro. Today's menu for her beloved stepdaughter was a highly specific $80 truffle and wild mushroom risotto. "Ramona!" Beulah called out, her voice devoid of its usual chipper tone. It was a hollow, exhausted rasp. "Your lunch is in the break room. It needs to be plated immediately, or the truffle oil separates. Ramona, heavily pregnant and scrolling on her phone, sighed dramatically. Ugh, finally. The baby was literally kicking my ribs because he's starving, Beulah. Did you get the sparkling water with the cucumber essence? Or did you mess it up again like Tuesday? Beulah's jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might shatter. It is in the bag, Ramona. The two women walked into the glass-walled break room. The office was quiet, most of the staff out for their own lunch hours. I slowly stood up, stepping into the safety of the fire stairwell doorway, keeping the heavy door propped open by an inch. At 11:52 a.m., the front reception doors didn't just open, they shattered. The explosive sound of breaking glass echoed through the corridor. A collective scream rose from the reception desk. Trent Lawson marched down the hallway. He looked unhinged, his clothes rumpled, his eyes wild and bloodshot. In his right hand, he carried a heavy, rusted tire iron. "Where is she?" Trent roared, his voice bouncing off the acoustic ceiling tiles. "Where is that manipulative parasite?" Panic erupted. Accountants dove under their desks. My heart hammered wildly in my chest, the phantom pain of my past death flaring in my ribs, but I forced myself to watch. Trent spotted Ramona through the glass walls of the break room. She was sitting at the table, her fork halfway to her mouth. Beulah was standing next to her, unpacking the expensive sparkling water. Trent stormed into the break room, raising the tire iron. "You think you can ruin my life, Becky? You think you can drain me dry?" In my past life, I had instinctively jumped between them, a foolish martyr fueled by blind empathy. Now Beulah Walsh was standing exactly where I had been. Beulah, who prided herself on being the ultimate caretaker, the moral superior, the brave village leader. Beulah froze, her eyes locked on the rusted metal weapon. "Now, young man," she stammered, raising a trembling hand, trying to channel her HR authority. "Let's take a deep breath. We are a family here at Meridian." "Shut up!" Trent screamed, swinging the tire iron downward. It was meant for the table, a violent display of intimidation, but what happened next was a terrifying echo of my own past. Ramona, driven by pure, unfiltered selfishness, shrieked. She didn't cower. She didn't freeze. She stood up, grabbed Beulah by the shoulders of her expensive floral blouse, and violently shoved her new stepmother directly into Trent's path. Beulah collided heavily with Trent. The tire iron didn't hit her head, but it struck her shoulder with a sickening, audible crack. Beulah collapsed to the linoleum floor, screaming in absolute agony as her collarbone fractured under the blow. The $80 truffle risotto went flying, splattering against the white tiles, mixing with the sudden, terrifying reality of the violence. Ramona didn't look back. She scrambled over Beulah's thrashing legs, completely ignoring the woman who had fed her, housed her, and married her father. Ramona bolted out the secondary emergency exit, leaving Beulah to face a furious, armed man, entirely alone. Sirens wailed in the distance. The building security finally tackled Trent from behind, wrestling him to the ground before he could do any more damage. I let out a long, shaky breath, letting the heavy fire door click shut. The loop was closed. The karma was delivered. 3 days later, I walked into the orthopedic ward of St. Jude's Hospital. The room was bleak and shared with 2 other patients. Beulah lay in the bed near the window, her arm and shoulder encased in heavy, restrictive casting. She looked pale, defeated, and utterly broken. I walked up to her bedside and gently placed a generic 99-cent "Get Well Soon" card on her tray table. Beulah slowly opened her eyes. When she saw me, fresh tears welled up, spilling over her bruised cheeks. "She pushed me, Camilla," Beulah whispered, her voice trembling with the trauma of betrayal. "I gave her everything. I married that monster of a father for her. I paid for her food, and she used me as a human shield." I looked down at Beulah. A part of me, the old Camilla, wanted to feel pity. But the new Camilla, the one who remembered the cold linoleum and the fading of her own heartbeat, felt nothing but a profound sense of justice. "Where is Richard?" I asked smoothly. Beulah sobbed, a pathetic, high-pitched sound. "He refused to upgrade me to a private room. He said the deductible on his bare-bones insurance plan was too high. And Ramona texted me this morning, complaining that the hospital cafeteria doesn't serve organic alkaline water, so she won't be visiting." I reached out and gently patted Beulah's uninjured hand. "Well, Beulah, it takes a village, doesn't it? You wanted to be the saint. You wanted to be the mother figure. It seems you finally got everything you asked for." I didn't wait for her response. I turned on my heel and walked out of the hospital room, the sterile smell of antiseptic fading away, replaced by the warm, sweet air of a beautiful summer afternoon. I had a second chance at life. My savings were intact, and my conscience was entirely clear. I smiled as I walked to my car, knowing that some people don't need a villain to ruin their lives. They just need someone to hand them the shovel so they can dig their own graves. If you loved this story of workplace drama, petty revenge, and intense karma, you are not going to want to miss what happens next on this channel. Smash that like button, share this video with your co-workers who definitely need a reality check, and hit subscribe, so you never miss out on the wildest, most satisfying storytelling on the internet. Drop a comment below, telling me exactly what you would have done if you were in Camilla's shoes. See you in the next video.